So first off, we need kind of the primary motivation for what we're trying to accomplish, right? So, I could sit here and say I'm going to learn Mandarin Chinese, but I don't have any desire to do that. I don't like learning foreign languages. I don't foresee any reason in the future that I would need to know Mandarin Chinese. So, one day that may be useful to me, but I really don't care about it right now. So that's kind of going to be a dumb goal to set. So we need to make sure that we have a reason for we have a reason for wanting what we're aiming towards. So, in a sailing context, maybe our big overarching long-term goal is that we want to be a really good sailor, or we want to be up at the varsity level of high school sailing, or something like that. And so having that vision that we're trying to work towards, that's going to help us as we're making kind of shorter term goals to help us move along that path to go there. That way when we're working through these short term goals, and a lot of them are not going to be very fun in and of themselves, but we can look back to that vision and say, this is why I want to do this, and kind of help us work through that. Another thing that can help us when we're thinking through different things is we want to write down our goals, right? Whether it's the big vision, maybe the big vision is something we write down and, I don't know, we put it on our bathroom mirror or something. But something that we can see every day and remind ourselves. And this is, all this is talking not just to sailing, right? This is any big thing we're trying to accomplish in our life. So having the vision up there that we can see, and when we're working through the smaller term, shorter term goals that we're using to get to where we want to go, just having those laid out, written down, nice and neat, so that we can almost like a list, right? If I were to say, I need to clean my room, it feels a lot better to be able to say, oh, I made the bed, so I can cross that off the list, and I took out the trash, so I can cross that off the list, and I cleaned up the floor, so I can cross that off the list, right? So whether it's like a list that we can actually physically cross off, or just a page that we've written down, I'm going to do this and then this and then this, and then be able to look back and reference to it, can be real helpful. So write down your goals, whether they're the long term or whether they're the shorter term that we just kind of need to flesh out and be able to look at. Next one, what was I lost my place? So also along with that, when we're kind of writing things down, we another thing that can help is write down positive statements, not negative statements. So maybe in a sailing context, instead of saying, I don't want to foul people as much, maybe we can phrase it as, I want to learn how to sail clean, how to avoid penalties, that sort of thing. So making it something positive that we're working towards, rather than something negative that we're trying to cut out. And obviously that's not going to work for everything, but often we can find a way to shift the thinking of how we're writing it down. Oh, Jonathan Stevenson is coming into the meeting again. So we've got that. Then another thing is if we're kind of sharing our goals in terms of other people know what we're working towards. So especially if it's something big in our life, or on the sailing team, kind of everybody is in theory working toward the same thing of getting better at racing. So when you have kind of support from people around you, that's another thing that makes it much easier to kind of stick to the process and stick to that goal. As if we've got those people that, one, we're in a group of people that we know we're all working toward the same thing. So we all know the different struggles or things we have to work through to get there, because either we're working through them together, or maybe we have worked through them before. So, Johnny and Sterling are at very similar skill levels right now. So they're both kind of, going through the same experiences, learning the same things right now. Dan can look back at Johnny and Sterling and remember when he was there and So maybe he has those little bits of wisdom that he picked up that he can share. And maybe Johnny and Sterling can look back at, Claire or Eli and remember when they were in that position of still kind of getting the boat handling down and starting to learn the racing tactics. And so, we're either in the same place working to the same thing, or we're ahead and we can help people who are behind, or we can ask people who are ahead how they did something. So having a group of people working toward the same goal, or even if we don't have, outside of a sailing context, even if we're not, even if the person that we're talking to about our goals isn't working toward the same thing, they can still help with that little bit of accountability, if that's the right word of, how you doing? You still working on it, still keeping up with those checklists you got, or whatever might be going on. So having a little bit of accountability helps too. And then the last kind of big thing before we step into more of the specifics of how to set up our goals would be, make sure we are sticking with that plan. We have that commitment to what we want to do, which is, the first thing we said was make sure we have a reason for setting this big goal. So we know we have that reason, so we make sure we stick with it. And in your life, maybe your priorities change. Maybe the big goal isn't necessarily what what you've decided to work towards now. So maybe your priorities have changed. But before saying, no, this is not something I'm going to go for anymore, kind of think about it and make sure like that's really what's going on. And it's not just that you're feeling discouraged that this is difficult, right? So if you decide that, I've been on the sailing team for a while, and now I don't really know if I want to keep getting better at sailing. Is that because sailing is really not my thing? And if it really is, then that's fine. Do what you really enjoy. But if it's more of just I'm kind of feeling discouraged because I'm working towards it, but I'm not really getting results, then maybe we can kind of come back and figure out a different way to help work past what our struggle is, rather than just completely giving up on it. So that's kind of another thing to think through there. All right, so looking into, how do we set up effective goals? How do we make them, specific enough that we can tell if we're getting through what we need to do? So there's something that if any of you have been on the varsity racing team for more than probably one season, you've heard us talk, or maybe we've actually worked everybody through SMART goals. SMART being an acronym. Actually, you know what? Let's use the whiteboard. I don't have anything typed out on the computer, so I'll just put the whiteboard up here and we can write down. Grab my markers. So SMART. You know how to spell. Let's see. Am I in frame? Let me adjust the camera a little bit. There we go. All right. SMART. Let's see if we can get interactive here. Who remembers what these letters stand for? Somebody shout me out a few words.
Think accuracy, reasonable, and time.
All right, so we've got a couple. Let's see. I heard accuracy. So that is, I'll say that's not the A we're going for. There are a couple different. You'll see a couple different versions, but I don't think I've seen accuracy. I heard reasonable, and that is one version. I'm going to use a different one today. So reasonable. We'll talk to that in a minute. And then time, yes. So time bound. We'll say what that is. All right. Anybody else remember? We've got SMA. Whoop, that's supposed to be a D right there. SMAR. Anybody remember any of those? I know someone's got. What's that?
Would it be attainable instead of reasonable? Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, attainable or achievable. Is that what you said?
No, it is not.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I gave us an answer then. May as well write it down. Attainable or achievable. What did you say then?
It's not what I said the first time. But that's what I said the second time.
Okay, cool. So yeah, we'll we'll run through the rest of them. So specific, measurable, attainable or achievable, and then relevant, and time bound. So you will see a few different versions. I think I've seen, I don't remember exactly how it went, but somehow the A and the R, the meanings, like there were two different words that kind of swap the meanings, but you still come out with, this is the basic idea, right? So when we're sitting here to write down our goals, this is more for the short-term ones. You have the longer-term ones, like I want to be, you have the vision. I want to be a really good racer, or whatever it may be. I want to get into Boston College or whatever it might be, Boston University, whichever one Lucy just told me yesterday she's committed to. So when you're when we're looking at kind of the more shorter term, how do we break this down into steps and figure out what we need to do? We'll kind of look at it and go through each one of these letters and figure out how to make this as specific as possible. So if I were going to say I want to do better roll tax, then how do I make that a little more specific? Maybe we can kind of break it down into the motions, and I need to have a very good tiller and main sheet swap if I'm the skipper. I need to figure out how to roll the boat as far as I need to, but not too far. So we can break it down into the little elements, and have figure out how to work on each little element at a time. So as specific as we can be. We don't want to just have a vague understanding of I want to get better at this, because how do we measure better in that sort of sense, right? If I can come out and say, well, right now, it takes me the entire tack it takes me an extra 10 seconds after the tack to really get that tiller and main sheet swap down. I need to be able to get that swap done while I'm crossing the boat. And so once I can do that, then I know that I've kind of got that mastered. So maybe that's not the best example, but not a lot of things are dealing with numbers, right? So maybe that is kind of the sort of measurements we come up with. But something that we can clearly say, we started here, we got here, there's a definite difference. So also attainable, right, or achievable, whichever word you would rather use. But it should be something that we can do. It's if this kind of plays into the time bound part of it as well, right? Like if we are trying to say I want to get onto the varsity racing team, but we're still kind of in the green fleet and still trying to figure out letting somebody else in the room here, still trying to figure out, the basics, then that's not going to be the best, goal to be working towards actively right now. We need to focus on some shorter term things, because that's just not something we can do right now. Or to use the example that I brought up yesterday, if I am trying to learn roll tax, but I really haven't got that tiller and main sheet switch yet, I need to focus on the right order of things to master. So we need to be able to do a normal tack very smoothly, and then we can look at the roll tack. But if I try to learn a roll tack right now and I can still barely sail, I'm not going to be able to do that, because I'm not at the right level to build up to that yet. So next one we look at is relevant. Is this going to actually help us? So like when I said earlier, what if I just decided to go learn Mandarin Chinese? It's not relevant to me. It'd be kind of a waste of time, because I'm sure there's a lot of other things I could be doing that would help me be a better sailing coach or a better whatever job I have. But if none of them, I'm not dealing with, I don't have to speak to anybody in Chinese. So it's for my situation, that'd be a waste of time. Also, the last one we spoke to already a little bit, time bound. So when is we want to have kind of a definite when we want to have accomplished this goal, because we don't want to end up in a situation where we say, I'm going to get better at roll tax, and then a month later, have I got better at roll tax? I don't know. Well, I've got a lot of time. There's plenty of time left in the season, and so if we don't have an end date set, then we could kind of end up just kind of pushing it back because I'll get to it later. So it can help us kind of keep on the rails like that. And then also we just want to have a realistic idea of when we might be able to make that happen, right? So it helps us not only keep motivated to keep working at it, but also it helps us to not get unmotivated, right? When we just don't see any end in sight. But if we know I've broken this down into a skill that I think I can figure out in 2 weeks, or I talked to Coach Josh and he thinks that at the end of the season we could have this, we could have this down pretty solidly. So it can kind of help on both ends of that motivation, right? So when we're sitting down to write a SMART goal, we don't have to make a different sentence for each one of these. It's more of, we're going to kind of write down what we're thinking of doing, and then we'll look at each one of these words in turn and see, is there anything I want to change about what I wrote? So we don't have to sit down on a paper with an S, a line for S and a line for M and a line for A. It should be something that is just one thing that we can look at and say, this is what I'm working towards. But we just want to make sure that we've kind of encompassed each one of these as we work through there. So kind of an example from stuff I've done in the past before I learned about how to set a goal that I can work towards. Kind of some examples of ways I did this well and ways I did this badly. So one of my hobbies besides sailing is speed cubing, or like solving a Rubik's Cube, right? So when I first learned how to solve a Rubik's Cube, there's kind of the beginner method, and you're kind of solving a piece at a time. But then, it turned into something that I enjoyed. So I started trying to solve it faster and faster. And I got to the point where I could solve it in, maybe a minute. And I decided I want to get like really fast at this if I can. So I started looking up, what are different things I can learn to make me be able to solve a Rubik's Cube faster. And one thing that I found was a step called, so I guess, how can I explain this well? I won't explain it too much. I found one of the last kind of big steps you typically learn in speed solving, and I tried to just go and do that right off the bat, learning a whole bunch of different patterns and different algorithms, different sets of moves to solve a bunch of different patterns. And I thought to myself, well, if I can, I can learn all these different patterns and algorithms, and I'm going to be able to solve the Rubik's Cube in fewer moves. But what I didn't take into account was the fact that even knowing all those different patterns, if I couldn't turn the cube faster like this, it wasn't really going to help me. I would still turn like this, and it took a lot longer. And so, I eventually realized that even if I went through that whole big thing of learning 57 different algorithms for different patterns on the cube, it wasn't going to help me much. And so I gave that up pretty quickly, right? So that would be an example of, I didn't make sure what I was trying to do was attainable. I wasn't at a point where I could really make that help me. So eventually I figured out that there were a bunch of smaller steps that I had to figure out. So I had to learn, finger tricks. So instead of moving the cube side by side like this, I can use my fingers to move a lot faster. And so I learned how to turn a little faster. And then there's other preliminary steps before you start learning all these crazy algorithms that still help you, solve more quickly without having to put in a whole bunch of time just memorizing strings of letters. And so once I figured out how to break down into a bunch of little steps, it ended up going a lot quicker, and I ended up progressing a lot faster than if I had just tried to sit there and, take this big chunk that wasn't really helpful to me at the time. So that was kind of the example of figuring out how to be more specific and break down into little small things. And that was measurable increases, right? I could say, yeah, now I can turn the cube faster than before because I can look and see I'm using my fingers to, spin the sides instead of turning the whole thing with my wrist. And so it was a measurable increase. So that was kind of the difference between, I didn't really have a goal in mind before, or a small process goal to work towards. I was just kind of going off the big, I want to be faster. But then I realized that I needed to kind of break down into little parts, and still keeping the vision in mind of I want to be faster. And so it helped get through the sitting there for a long time just doing this is pretty boring, and sitting there a long time going learning the little small moves was pretty boring, just doing that without seeing the cube get solved. And when I first started, when I started trying to put those new things into solving, it made me slower initially because it was something new. I wasn't used to it yet. So initially it made me slower, but I knew it was something that I needed to work through. And then in the end, it would make me a lot faster. So I think there's a lot of parallels there to many different things, but especially to sailing, where when we are, we're first learning how to do a race start. And so right now, when, one of the main things we know for higher level racing is that when we're on the start line, we have to sit and luff on the line. But when we're first learning how to control our boat while we're luffing and sitting still, we mess up a lot, right? We go and we get stuck in irons and we're drifting around and can't move. When we're too low and still we're moving around and we're bumping into other boats and having to do circle penalty spins. And so when you're first starting that, it's easy to just get stuck in the mindset of, I can't do that, so I'm going to do what I can do, which is come into the line very fast. And I know that there are many times when it doesn't work, when maybe there's no space on the line, or I always have to come in late, or I'm always early, because that, there are limitations to coming into the line fast. But if I try to luff on the line, then, every time I try that, I end up messing up. So why try it at all? So it's easy to kind of get stuck in that mindset, but we know that it's one thing we have to work through to get to the bigger goal of being able to, perform a very good race start. So we know that we have to mess up a lot, and we just have to accept that we will do worse than we did before. We're learning this new skill, and while we're learning it, we will perform worse than we did before. But that's what our practice times are for, so that we have to get through that kind of time period of doing worse, and just accept that that's going to happen. And then gradually we get used to that skill and we can perform it more smoothly. We can perform it better. And so now we're able to luff on the line. And so now we can work on, the next part of the start is the acceleration. And so now I have to work on, putting the bow down a little bit and turning back up into the wind and getting all these different actions synchronized so that they all come together. And that's going to be really jerky when I first start. But I know that that's one thing I have to work through to get to this bigger goal of doing a good race start. So kind of having that mindset is important to us when we're going for a bigger goal and we have to work through these smaller process goals. A lot of the times when we get down to a very specific level, we are breaking things down into, very small chunks. So we are, we're saying, I want to get better at the start. So we're breaking it down to luffing on the line and accelerating afterwards and holding our lane, and just practicing all those by themselves probably gets pretty boring and annoying, right? I'm sure we've all had that thought before of, why do we have to keep doing these over and over? Why can't we do anything else? But if we're able to think through, like, I know that I do need to keep working on this if I want to get better. That can kind of help, keep your motivation to really focus while we're doing those drills, so that you get through to the other side where it gets we're smooth and we can do these without trying so hard. So that's probably a big, I'd say that's one of the biggest things to kind of help the mindset, is that a lot of times we do have to do stuff that is not very fun in order to get to the reward at the end. So just remembering that is what we're working towards. Maybe we take it out of the sailing context, and maybe we're studying for a test and sitting there with your flashcards for hours, or however you study. Is probably not very fun. Some of you, that is fun and good stuff. I envy you. But for a lot of people, it's really not fun to sit down with flashcards and running through information in your head and writing notes and all that stuff. But we know that to get that good grade on that test, or to get the A in that class, whatever it is that we're working towards, we know we have to go through that. So that helps with the that kind of helps keep that motivation up. All right, now a couple more things. I think in a minute we'll try to get interactive again, and we'll try to come up with a SMART goal as a group. We'll take a few minutes and do that. But a couple more things before we start. So one is, when we're trying to think of a goal to set for ourselves, we want to remember the difference between kind of results-based and goals and performance-based goals. And maybe those two words are a little confusing. But numbers versus how versus what or how we're doing, right? So again, some to kind of reference something we talked about yesterday. If we go into a regatta and say, I think I can get third in this regatta, that doesn't take into account the fact that, maybe there's conditions that we're not used to dealing with. Maybe a few other people are having a really good day. So there's a lot of things that can change how we finish. But if we go in and we say, I want to, get a good start on every start of the race, because that's something that I've been working on in the last couple weeks of practice. Something like that, that's more focused on, what we're doing, and something that's in our control. So that's when we're kind of thinking of, what sort of goal should I set? We want to focus more on what is in our control versus what is dependent on a lot of other things as well. So that another one is kind of speaking to the attainable, maybe the time bound as well. But we're looking for, we might call it the Goldilocks, or I guess the official term is the zone of proximal development, if you've ever heard that. But it's basically saying we want to be working at a level that kind of challenges us, but is not too hard for what we can do right now. So it's interesting in maybe looking at like the Green Fleet, when I'm coaching all the Green Fleet sailors. I have to try to walk the line between everybody's different skill levels, right? So if you're a beginner sailor, then I can't expect you to be doing to be working on perfect roll tacks. I need to make sure that you know how to do a normal tack very smoothly. But if you're almost up to the point where you can go and start racing, then maybe we are working on those roll tacks, and maybe just doing, maybe sailing around in a circle and hot dog drill for all practice is getting pretty boring, because, we're pretty good at that already. So ideally we're able to work with everyone and get them something that is challenging them, is making them, work harder than usual if they were just sailing around, but is also not something that is too hard, not something that we just can't expect them to be able to do, even with some help. Because we could go through a lot of different examples. You can probably think of different examples. But when we're setting our own goals, we do want to make sure that we are, not expecting too much out of ourselves. It's kind of almost kind of counterintuitive. It's like everybody tells us to aim high, right? Well, if we if we aim too high, that may cause us to just become discouraged because we can't do what we set out to do, even though it may actually have been kind of an unreasonable task. But at the same time, we don't want our goal to be, I made cereal for breakfast today, because that's, you pour milk and cereal in a bowl. You don't get any real sense of accomplishment from it. So that was maybe a dumb example, but you kind of get the point there. If you've heard the saying before, something along the lines of, to be an expert at something, you have to practice it for 10,000 hours, something like that. So from what we've talked about today, you might be able to figure out that's really not got a lot of truth to it necessarily, right? So for one, just completely outside of this talk, everybody improves at different things at different rates. But just talking from this sort of standpoint is that we know we need to, we can practice something for a long time, but if we aren't always looking to improve at what we're doing, then we'll just kind of sit at the same level. We might be very good at making a flat tack, but we might be the best in the world at making a flat tack, but somebody who can come along and do a real good roll tack is going to beat us all day, because they improved to a level beyond at which we were. So just repeating something is not necessarily what makes you really good. It's always that working to improve and push yourself to a higher level. That's where that's how we get up to racing at a high level, or whatever it is we're trying to do. Dan is coming back in. Didn't notice we had missed him. So 10,000 hours doesn't mean anything. You can get as good as you want in about as little time as you want, or you can take longer. But the 10,000 hours number doesn't mean anything for you. So don't let it discourage you. If you're looking at wanting to become very good at something, you don't necessarily have to just throw a lot of time into it. You're still going to have to put some time into it, but not 10 years or whatever that would be. What's 10,000 hours? What's a work year? Is like 2,000 hours. So 40 hours a week for 5 years would get you 10,000 hours. So the good news is, to get good at sailing, we don't need to spend 40 hours a week for 5 years. Anyway, all right. So that was SMART goals. Kind of talk through that, and it turns out we can actually go even a little beyond SMART goals. And I've never heard of these guys before. Some people with the last names of Locke and Latham, they have what they call 5 principles of goal setting, and 3 of them actually kind of cover under SMART goals. But then there's 2 that we have, we've mentioned a little bit, but we'll kind of put them out as, this is also important. So their 5 principles is clarity, challenge, commitment, feedback, and task complexity. So we've already talked through the SMART goal stuff. So we can say, clarity, what is my goal? Is it specific? That sort of thing. That's covered there. What else? The challenge. So like we talked, that Goldilocks zone sort of thing. We want to make sure that it is challenging to us, but we also want to make sure that it just doesn't completely shut us down. And then also the task complexity. So again, looking at, the attainable part there, want to make sure that it's something we can do. But then we're left with 2, right? That are kind of, these are the ones that are kind of in our head, right? The on paper stuff is the SMART goal. We can write that down on paper, but then we've got those last 2, the commitment, which we've already talked a good amount about, and then the feedback. So that's, again, kind of, we are working towards this goal, and if it's something like learning something new, we need to get that feedback as, am I really doing this the correct way, or am I mistakenly learning something incorrectly, or is there an easier way to do this that I didn't know about? So that kind of feedback, and then also, like we talked about way back in the beginning, having a kind of other people who can support us as we're working through a goal. If it's maybe some big life event we're working up to, having people encourage us along the way is always nice. If it's improving sailing skills, then we've got that sailing team around us who's all working toward the same thing, and so they can kind of help us keep accountable. Keep us from slacking off if we know we have kind of that timeline we want to work towards. Somebody who's able to say, aren't you trying to get that luffing on the line down in the next 3 weeks, or isn't that what you said? So kind of having that accountability, and then like we just said, the other side of that feedback is that's kind of my big job as the coach, is to be able to say, here, this is what you're doing right now. That's what it should look like. Or, what you're doing right now, you could actually improve by doing it this way instead. So those two different things, kind of the encouragement, and then also the whatever, I don't have one single word to put that into, but somebody who can tell you, are you doing it right? Are you doing it wrong? Is there a better way? I think the last thing to just like wrap everything up would be, make sure you're also, having fun on so it's something that you can enjoy. We're saying that for sailing, our overarching goal is getting to be a better racer. And why are we wanting to do that? Well, at the heart of it, it's because, we really enjoy sailing, and we really enjoy racing, most of us. So making sure that it's something that it's worthwhile to us, and understanding that, we don't necessarily have to be, just grinding all the time. If we never have time to sit back and enjoy it a little bit, then we are going to kind of burn ourselves out. So, focus as much as we can. We're doing our drills, but also just have fun sailing. That kind of gets back to that. We talked about the three types of sailors. The people that just really have fun doing it, and they're completely okay with not rising to a high level because they just like the experience. And then there's the people who are going for the top of the league, and they really have to kind of grind themselves through these little process goals because they know that's what they have to work through to get there. And then there are that's probably the smallest group of the people this is something they really love doing. And like the Paul Elvstrom story we read, where every single second he's on the boat, it's racing, because that's what matters to him. That's what he does enjoy. And so that's the type of person that would be, that would have really probably enjoyed the luffing on the line, and no matter how long we have to do it, because that's getting better, and getting better is fun to him. So that is definitely the smallest group. But if you're in that middle group of, I want to get better, but I don't really like having to do all these drills, or the group of, I want to have some fun, but I'm on the sailing team here, so gotta work through these drills with everybody. That's kind of make sure that we keep the overall mindset of, we are out here to have fun, and that'll help you get through, work toward those goals.